This is probably the #1 most hotly anticipated case on the Level 1 forums for the last year or so. SilverStone. SilverStone knows how to make grown-up workstation cases with no RGB and very thick steel panels. This is the CS383. 8-bay SAS12G SATA 6G non-hot swappable high-performance NAS chassis, aka small business server chassis too. I mean, what's not to love? 186mm clearance for your tower cooler height. It supports dual power supplies with the other power supply mounted internally. It also has 3 5¼ bays at the front. 3 5¼ bays will let you add more 3.5-inch bays or specialty bays. We've covered adapters that give you more functionality from both SilverStone and ICDock in the past. So if you wanted to add an 8-bay NVMe or a bunch of 2.5-inch storage, the 5¼ bays give you that option. The top supports a 420mm radiator, 360mm radiator, or 120/280mm radiators. Do note that if you're going to use a 420mm radiator, your total thickness before you clear the 5¼ bay device area is 57mm, or 65mm if you're going to go for a 280mm before you hit the top of the motherboard tray. Now, second power supply is a little bit like second breakfast. It's not redundancy. It's not redundancy on anything. On some Threadripper motherboards, you have the option to do, dual-wheeled power supplies. So you could put in 2,000 watt power supplies, for example, and that gives you some options to be able to run more GPUs. However, no motherboard that I know of supports redundancy in that configuration. If you want redundancy, you'll have to use a special power supply that explicitly gives you redundancy. But this case will let you mount one power supply in the normal position at the back and another one in the bottom, in the front, with an extension cable. The extension cable is an extra accessory that you'll have to order, I think. And there are those 5¼ bays, 1 at the top, 3 at the bottom. Now, if you are going to use a 420mm radiator that's thicker than 57mm, don't use the top 5¼ bay, or if you do use it with something that's very shallow. This case gives you a lot of flexibility for mounting things. There's mounting holes here, so if you don't want to use the 3.5-inch bay thing, you could use something else. You can mount that for whatever. There's also bays at the rear for 3.5-inch and 2.5-inch drives that are not, hot swap accessible. If you want a hot swap, you can add some more accessories to the front and get it done. At the top, we've got 2 Type A ports, a Type C port, 4 status LEDs, which is great. I know some of you are going to buy this case just because it has 4 status LEDs at the top. 2 are meant for networking, 1 for power, 1 for drive activity, but I know a ton of you out there are going to use the network ones for their add-in SAS cards or other indicators within the system. All this stuff at the front is screwed in, so if you want to reconfigure this case or use 3D printed accessories or other accessories with it, you totally can, because you can just unscrew it. Also take note, if you build a workstation that needs to travel, this bar is for holding your GPU or GPUs in place, and it will hug the GPU from the top and the bottom, which is great for traveling with it. If you're shipping this long distance, I still recommend dismounting the CPU cooler and the solution for mounting your GPU or your GPUs internally, because it's less physical stress. But if you're just carrying this around for trade shows, in an armored case, or carrying this around between various things, or some people have rolly desks. It's like this is mounted on a rolly workstation to roll around different parts of your company depending on what team that you're working on. Then this will work great, and you don't have to disassemble the machine, and it'll steady your GPU, because the GPUs are so really powerful. And if you're spending, if you're like buying that RTX Pro Blackwell GPU for $8,500, you can just not worry about it because it's securely mounted. There are a ton of little quality of life features with this case. It's got some built-in fans for the 3.5-inch drive cooling, Velcro straps built into the drive cages. There's places for Velcro straps pretty much everywhere on this case. There's rubber grommets in a lot of the pass-throughs between the motherboard tray and the rear of the case, which is great. There's not rubber grommets everywhere. There's not rubber grommets at the bottom where the power supply is, where you pass from the motherboard tray to the power supply, but this is a reasonable design in my opinion. The only thing that I really noticed with this case that I think SilverStone missed is that 2.5-inch drive mounting. You've got a lot of room here when you're using the 3.5-inch bay. I mean, originally the metal tooling here was designed for 5¼ inch drives. The front plastic, where the 3.5-inch drives are, is not really removable. You could probably get a different front panel or something somewhere, but you could put something together if you really had to. But the front panel is really only meant for those 4 5¼ inch bays, not to take the 3.5-inch drives out and replace them with yet more 5¼ inch drives. Because of that, I think it's fine that the front of this is the way that it is. But there are still mounting holes all the way down the side here, and you could use that for zip ties or something else. But I think it's a missed opportunity for putting in 2.5-inch drive mounting holes, because you could get 4 or 5 2.5-inch drives in here. There's plenty of room. In terms of motherboard support, SSI EEB full size ATX. It's 8 PCIe slots, so if you've got a 7-slot motherboard, the GPU or whatever can hang off the end and not block any of your slots, which is fantastic. You got plenty of vertical clearance for really tall PCIe cards, which is, important in our, 5090 Founders Edition RTX Pro 6000 world that we live in. A lot of good options here, a lot of good breathability, so a lot of hidden mount points where the tray is that separates the power supply area from the motherboard tray area. A lot of expansion, a lot of nice high quality folded steel. There's a lot to like here. It comes with a nice 140mm fan pre-installed at the rear and relies on the cooling fans for the drive cages for front cooling. There's a dust filter at the bottom and the front, which is great. I think the top is set up to be an exhaust. These micro holes, this is technically not a dust filter per se, but these holes are so small that they are pretty effective at filtering dust if you feel the need to configure your top for intake. Officially, they say internally you can have one 3.5-inch device plus 2 2.5-inch devices, and then 4 more 2.5-inch devices internally, depending on how you arrange things. And they're mainly talking about over here, not this 3D printed stuff that I'm just sort of rambling about on the other side. There's lots of room to get creative here and stuff even more drives in internally, in other words. Bottom line, the CS383, there's no RGB, nor should there be, I think, for their target customer. It is exceptionally well built, nice, thick, folded metal. Well built enough to forgive whatever chicanery you're going to get into with a build like this. Now, we've got some new Threadrippers coming up, or so I'm told. This would make an excellent platform for building a workstation like that. You can use a 360mm AIO cooler in the top. That will work fine. You could even deploy a dual socket server motherboard in this. SilverStone has a really nice dual processor single radiator that'll work great for dissipating up to 800 watts of CPU. 800 watts of cooling from a single 360mm radiator, recommended push-pull configuration, which is going to make it kind of thick at the top and take up some space in your very top 5.25-inch bay. But you got 3 5.25-inch bays at the bottom, so you can do something fun with that. It's been a quick tour of the case. What do I need to build in this? I'm tempted to put a Threadripper system in this, but because it's got the drives, maybe I should lean towards something that's a little bit more servery. You can use a Threadripper as a server. That's completely fine. But I still got those dual actuator 18TB hard drives, and I recently basically used up all of our flash storage space. So maybe I could build something that's a little hybrid here that has some high-speed, high-performance Kioxia flash storage along with some mechanical storage. I'm gonna need more 2.5-inch bays if I do that. I may have to get creative with figuring that out. SilverStone also has their giant 1600 watt power supply that we reviewed previously. You should check out a power supply like that for this build versus going the dual power supply route. That 1600 watt power supply will give you Threadripper and 2 5090s or 2 RTX Pro 6000s, the 600 watt edition, or 4 of the Max Q edition, because those are 300 watts each. And this chassis will happily support that configuration because remember, 8 PCIe slots. But yeah, that's about all I've got to say about that. Hey, you've been with me this far. What do you think about SilverStone creating a repository for 3D printable accessories for their cases on their website? There's definitely a lot that can be done. There's a lot of mount points for 3D printable accessories in a case like this. And there's a lot of accessories that SilverStone sells too. Like, you could get an intrusion switch and that sort of stuff. Well, it depends on the case model, but SilverStone has a lot of accessories as well. I've also 3D printed power supply cable guides. So rather than getting like a power supply patch cord for this, just a 3D printable insert, so you can just feed a regular power supply cable in, and then you've got a little 3D printed grommet that'll fit in the secondary power supply hole that's here. So that's an option. But if you want a 3D printable accessory for that, engage below or leave a comment on the Level 1 forums, and maybe we can get cracking doing some 3D printable accessories for these. Because as hot as this case has been on the Level 1 forums, I think a lot of people are going to be showing off their builds there, which I love to see. All right, I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. I'm signing out. You can find me in the Level 1 forums.